All right, I got back from the gym and I saw From the World of John Wick. God, am I using that fucking title? I just saw the John Wick spinoff, Ballerina, starring Ana de Armas, Keanu Reeves, kinda. What's his name? Ian McShane, kinda, and Lance Reddick, kinda. I'll get into that kinda in a bit. So first, this will be mildly spoilery, but overall, I think you'll get the gist of it. So before I go any further, what are my thoughts on the movie without getting too much into the reasons why? Well, overall, this is about a 6 or a 7 out of 10. The first half of the movie is very story driven, but then something happens, which I'll get into, that causes the second half of the movie to be basically nonstop action. The action is really good, but it's not grounded realistic. It is some Looney Tunes bullshit that is entertaining to watch, but if you're not really into that, if you're more into the more grounded and realistic action of John Wick's 1 and 2 and not necessarily the bombastic actions of 3 and 4, this movie is really not going to be your bag. And if you're looking for a deeper, in-depth look at this world, you're going to be half satisfied. So overall, a little light on story, with some absolutely ridiculous logic that manages to at least satiate my appetite as a John Wick fan. So 6, bordering on a 7. Now, why is it that I feel that way? Well, let's get into it. So first off, what is the story of Ballerina? Well, Eve, played by Ana de Armas, watches her father get killed by a mysterious Russian death cult when she was a young girl, and is taken in by an Ian McShane's Winston at a young age to be delivered to what's her name? The ballerina teacher from Chapter 3, who's played by Angelica Houston. Right, Angelica Houston. Ooh, sorry about that. But she's taken in by Angelica Houston as the director, and is trained as a ballerina from a young age to become a John Wick style assassin. Eventually, one of the cult members comes back into the fray, and soon she gets pulled into a story of revenge, and that's about it. This is a very, very light story that follows a lot of John Wick isms, and I say light on story, but it does try and delve deeper into the world of the ballerina, which we saw briefly in Chapter 3. And what is rather interesting is that this movie actually does sit really nicely between Chapters 3 and 4 of John Wick. And we do actually get to see Keanu Reeves as John Wick, kind of. Essentially, he is in the movie for probably a grand total of 3 minutes, maybe 4. He's in a scene at the beginning, which is meant to be an intersecting path that takes place during Chapter 3, which, it doesn't feel shoehorned in. It actually does feel like a sort of natural progression of the story and the timelines. It's actually really nice to see this unfold properly. But it's as soon as the Russian death cult, which is marked by an X on their arm, come in, a lot of the John Wick stuff is pushed to the side, and it becomes a driven tale of revenge. Now, it's after the events of John Wick, Chapter 4. It's like we do want to see more of this world, specifically one character from Chapter 4, Donnie Yen's character, Kane. But instead, we got Eve, the ballerina. Now, how does she hold up as a character? She's fine. Actually good. Not great by any means. She's no Furiosa, but, what is actually interesting is that she gets her ass handed to her so much in this movie. She kicks ass, but she also gets her ass handed to her on a very nice silver platter made of crystal or whatever. But what is very odd is that they have a line here. Like here's the thing about this movie. The logic sometimes makes sense, but most of the time it doesn't. Like, we see her training, we see her not succeeding, but then she's told, you must fight like a girl. And then, she does better by essentially shooting guys in the balls, women in the vagina, and then kicking dudes in the balls twice. But And then it's like, oh, okay, we understand. Like, we understand how she gets to where she's at now. But then there's just moments where she just straight up takes an ass beat. Like, there are multiple times in this movie where she takes an ass beating so fucking bad. You're thinking to yourself, holy shit, John Wick took lighter treatment than this. What the fuck? Like, how is she still standing? How is she not having her arm dangle like this with her leg going, oh my God, help me? Like seriously. It is insane the amount of damage this girl takes, and I get it, You have Ana de Armas. Sorry, that's as bright as it goes. My apologies. You have Ana de Armas, who is an objectively beautiful actress, and you don't want to fuck up her face and body because, she's beautiful from head to toe. But at the same time, it's like there's a sense of believability that's just not quite here, And you can take suspension of disbelief all you want, even though there's a lot of plot contrivances. Like, for example, when the Russian death gang shows up, or were they Polish? Either way, it's never really specified. But when they show up, it's literally just out of nowhere ramming a car into her car. It's ridiculous. But there's this amount of suspension of disbelief that you can take. But, you have a 5'6" woman who's probably like 110 pounds. And you put her up against guys who are like 6'4", and they're just wiping the fucking floor with her. Now, there are times where it does make sense, She crawls on top, chokes them out with her legs, and just keeps doing this to the top of their head, sometimes using a knife, like, like she's spider monkeying it. It makes sense. And by the way, considering the cultural zeitgeist of everything, she's not a Mary Sue. She's just a slightly bland main character that is played really well by Ana de Armas. If it wasn't for her as an actress and her as an actor, yes, there's a difference, I don't think this role would have worked nearly as well. And, thankfully she as a character never talks down to men. She never once says, I know better than you. She is at least a 2.5 dimensional character. There's a lot about her that works. And it's kind of like what happened. I know a lot of discussion, it kind of relates this movie to Furiosa. I think Critical Drinker even brought this up as well. And he's not wrong. Eve is not a bad character. It's just a matter of she's not nearly as good as John Wick. And there's a certain level of expectations that come with a spinoff of said amazing character, which I said, we'll get into the whole John Wick stuff. But anywho, like I said, this movie is a bit messy. And it is well known, at least in the whole film sphere, that this movie went through a huge restructuring. And what I mean by that is that apparently the director of this movie, who did Underworld, delivered a cut sometime last year that, the producers and studio just didn't like. As a matter of fact, I think one of the test screeners that watched it on Reddit said that this movie was borderline unwatchable. So eventually Chad Stahelski, who helmed the original John Wicks, came in and essentially reshot the movie, which is where, like I said, this movie is basically split up into two parts. The first half, which is very dialogue and story driven, and the second half, which is literally all action. And this is where the movie may make or break for you, because the action here is fucking ridiculous. And I mean that in the most egregious way. Like, it's good. I love it. I'm a big fan of spectacle. I'm a big fan of action. I'm a very visual guy. But there's a whole sequence with grenades, which, by the way, let me take a step back and praise this movie for at least having that same level of creativity. After John Wick Chapter 2, they realized they had to up the ante and get a little more creative with the violence and kills. Thus, in John Wick Chapter 3, you had the knife throwing sequence and the horse kicking a dude in the face, and then the dogs biting people in the balls before getting shot in the head. And in John Wick Chapter 4, you had the dragon's breath scene. Ballerina is no different. It does do a lot of really funky, creative shit with its violence. There's a whole sequence where two people are on the floor and they're smashing plates into each other. They're throwing plates into each other, and there's a whole scene with an axe where she throws it across the room and it hits a dude in the face. There's a lot of really creative shit. But one of the biggest action set pieces, which you see in the trailers, is there's a whole sequence revolving around grenades. And essentially, it's Eve storming a bunker, throwing grenades everywhere. And at first, it's kind of like, oh man, this is kind of cool. But it goes from that to, holy shit, how is this bitch not fucking dead? If you've seen the movie, you know exactly the moment that I'm talking about with the table, where you're like, how are you not dead? How are you not dead? That is not how grenades work. That is not at all how grenades work. It's fucking ridiculous. But, and like I said, this movie does stretch the suspension of disbelief to a very, very thin line. And it gets to the point where even you as the viewer are like, how does this happen? There was even then, I was in a theater where like one of the people in front of me after a certain scene was like, how is she still alive? I met up with this girl later, and turns out she hadn't even seen a John Wick movie, and she rarely sees movies. This is someone who is literally just an average moviegoer who just went to go see a movie. A normal person was like, that's ridiculous. But I digress. It's still creative, and yes, there is a flamethrower fight scene. I can't believe I'm saying this, but there is a flamethrower fight scene. It's cool, and a lot of the action is very cool, but like a dance, there is a certain amount of time needed for the spectacle to actually be impactful. If you carry on too little, you leave people wanting more in a bad way. Carry on too long, and you leave people going, okay, I get it, like, can we move on? And unfortunately, Ballerina goes towards the latter half. It gets to the point where there is so much action and so little story to actually break. Like, this is a great example of, holy shit, now I understand why we have scenes with people talkie during the fight scenes. It's because you need that breath. You need a chance for the audience to just not shrug their shoulders so much. If you're like just going, oh my God, when is this like hyper like adrenaline scene gonna end? And you know, there is so much of that in this movie that you're just not allowed to breathe. And this is a great example as to why you do need those little story beat moments. And while they are in here, they last maybe less than a minute before we go right back to the action. And there are like action set pieces that sometimes last 10 minutes. And here's the thing, this movie is about 2 hours and 3 minutes. And let's take away the credits. It is about an hour and 55 minutes. And the final act of like the second half of this movie is about maybe an hour of that. And it gets exhausting. This movie does get exhausting at times. However, I will go back to that production stuff in a bit, but let's talk about what was one of the main selling points of this movie, and that is John Wick. Yes, he's in this movie, and I was a little skeptical because I'm kind of used to having like new female characters come in and then beat the shit out of the main character, like the main male characters that we know. And, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, cool. I mean, yeah, let's go, I suppose. But they don't do that here, you know? And by the way, this is the mild spoilery parts that I do want to get into. John Wick does, in fact, fight Eve. And in one of the coolest moments that I think this franchise has had, we actually see a third-person... Sorry, I got a notification. Got to swipe that away. We actually do see a third-person perspective of John Wick. Like, we see what the Baba Yaga is like when we're not following him. And it is amazing. His fight with Eve is both anticlimactic and fully justified. It lasts probably a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes, and it only works because of the context of who we know John Wick is as a person. Not even as a person, as a man. And what was so cool is that he just shows up because at one point, the Russian cult boss is like calling the director like, yeah, look, one of your fucking ballerinas is starting shit, and if you don't take care of her, like we're gonna fuck you up and we're gonna declare war. Okay, let me send somebody. So they send John Wick to take care of her. And you know, I was so afraid that Eve was gonna have like a fighting chance and then eventually win due to some bullshit circumstances. But no, John Wick wipes the floor with her, essentially telling her, just leave, disappear, like you have a choice. Please don't make me do this. And it's like you can tell through subtext and even subtlety that he is still the man that we knew. This isn't Baba Yaga John Wick. This is still the man John Wick. He is essentially telling her, you have an out. You have the ability to leave. So just leave. And it is a really good scene. However, without getting into the resolution of his arc, there is another scene that is very obviously a reshoot, because there's a scene where we see him on a watchtower overlooking a courtyard, and then someone attacks him, and we go into a John Wick style action scene where one of the funniest jokes of the movie is delivered, where one guy's like, we gotta get out of here. We can't do this. Oh, come on, we can take him. Are you kidding me? That's suicide. That's fucking John Wick. Oh, he's just one man. How dangerous can he be? And he just seriously, it's an amazing action sequence that really it's like just that nice little send off, like just a reminder why this man held the action genre by the balls for almost a decade. It's because no one does it quite like John Wick. But then immediately after that scene, he's back at the guard, like not looking exhausted, not even having cuts on his face. He's on that guard tower again. And it's like, oh, the production issue. They clearly originally only had him in for that one fight scene. And it's like, wow, you had John Wick basically wipe the floor with Eve and nothing more. So having that little bit, even if it was messy, it was still nice to actually see John Wick do some John Wick shit in a John Wick spinoff. But overall, even in the latter half of the movie, the story is still such a mess. There's a revelation that happens that I will not spoil. But there's a revelation that happens that's tackled for about a minute and then it's quickly discarded. And, like I said, there are other people in this movie. Ian McShane kind of is in this movie, and Lance Reddick kind of is in this movie, and Norman Reedus is also in this movie, kind of. They're only like I said, this movie does have a John Wick tradition, which is bringing in big name stars for 1 minute scenes. And Lance Reddick and Ian McShane are in this movie, but they're in it very briefly. So it's like they might as well have been a little bit of cameos. They don't Winston does play more of a supporting role, but very, very minutely. And even Lance Reddick just has the same amount of screen time as he did in the first John Wick, even less so. And even Norman Reedus has a role to play in this movie, but even then, it's still so minor. And it's frustrating because the marketing played up their role so big. Even same with John Wick, and none of them are in the movie for longer than 10 minutes. They are their on-screen presence is so minute, they might as well have not been there at all. It's nice that they're there. It makes the world feel more connected. I am not saying they shouldn't have been in this movie. It's just, this is more of a, what are you doing marketing? Yeah, sure, you got me to go see the movie, but now my enjoyment of this movie is brought down a little bit because you essentially promised something that wasn't actually true. They are not in this movie that long, so you should have basically kind of kept their presence a secret. You should have maybe said they're in this movie and then, of course, left it at that. I don't know. I've made shorts, but I'm not really that much into marketing, so maybe I'm wrong. Oh my goodness. I know I'm ranting for almost 20 minutes now over this dumb spinoff, but overall, I still liked it a lot. The spectacle and the action is so well choreographed. Sure, there are some sloppy CG moments and some moments where it's you can clearly tell the stuntmen are trying to slow themselves down so Anna can keep up. But Anna's dedication is still very much felt. You can tell that she did put a lot of effort into these fight scenes, and it's kind of hard to not root for her to kick ass because she still is likable. She's not a very fleshed out character, but she's likable enough to where you're yeah, kick their ass. But, this movie is still very, very, very messy. So if you're not a John Wick fan, I'd say maybe give it a shot. If honestly my friends watched it, they're big John Wick fans, but even then they're 1 and 2 John Wick fans, not 3 and 4. And overall, they found themselves not enjoying it as much. But me personally, I believe that this actually does have a good justification to be considered part of John Wick canon. It's messy and it barely skirts the line to be considered canon, but it's still enjoyable. I still think I had a good time, you know? I want to give it a 7, but part of me thinks that I still have that high of all those insane action sequences in my head, so it might be more of a 6. But, you know, I still left the theater with a smile on my face going, man, what a wonderful time in the theater that is. A little fucking ridiculous, but still a very good time. It may not be a good movie by any means, but it's certainly a fun movie. And at the end of the day, I think a movie like this, getting your enjoyment and getting your money's worth for the action that you get, I think that's worth, the $5 or $10 ticket price, or even $20 ticket price.